My boyfriend and I had booked an Airbnb for a short stay during our trip. It wasn't anything fancy, just a small apartment advertised as a cozy private unit. The listing said it was the basement apartment of a family home. That didn't bother us, at least not at the time. We just needed somewhere to sleep, shower, and crash after long days of traveling. When we arrived, the owner was there to greet us. She was a woman in her late 30s, maybe early 40s, and the moment she opened the door, I could tell she was the type who liked to talk. She had that energy where you feel like she's already mid-conversation, before you've even introduced yourself. As soon as we stepped through the door, she launched into this long, wandering explanation about her life, how she was a single mom with 3 kids, how she was managing everything on her own, how proud she was of herself for turning the basement into an Airbnb and making it work. I wasn't trying to be rude, but we'd just had a really long day. We'd been traveling since early morning, and it was late when we finally arrived. My boyfriend looked completely drained. He was jet-lagged and barely holding his eyes open. He gave polite nods here and there, and I smiled when it seemed appropriate, but honestly, I just wanted her to hand us the keys and go back upstairs. After about 10 minutes, she finally did, though she seemed reluctant to end the conversation. The place itself was fine. Not super clean, not super dirty, just kind of what you'd expect from a basement apartment. The walls were painted an off-white color that had yellowed a bit. The carpet felt slightly damp underfoot, and the air smelled faintly like laundry detergent mixed with something earthy, like wet concrete. It had 1 bedroom, a small bathroom, and a little kitchenette. Nothing special, but it would do. We didn't bother unpacking much. We just dropped our bags by the wall, made sure the door was locked at least. I remember hearing the click, and crawled straight into bed. I fell asleep almost instantly. At some point early in the morning, before the sun was fully up, I felt this weird pulling on the blanket. You know when you're half asleep and your brain is trying to decide if something is real, or just part of your dream? That's what it felt like. I thought maybe my boyfriend was tossing and turning, but then I realized it wasn't coming from his side. It was at the foot of the bed. Something was tugging at the blanket, like trying to crawl under it. My very first thought was that maybe an animal had somehow gotten inside. A cat or a dog, maybe. We'd stayed at places before where the owners had pets that wandered. I opened my eyes slowly, not fully awake yet, and that's when I saw him. A little boy. He was climbing up onto the blanket, using his small hands to pull himself onto the bed. He couldn't have been older than 6 or 7. His hair was messy, sticking up in tufts like he'd just rolled out of bed, and he wore these pale blue pajamas with faded cartoon characters on them. I just froze. I didn't know who he was, where he came from, or why he was in the room with us. My heart was pounding so hard it was all I could hear in my ears. I sat up quickly and just blurted out, hello? The boy didn't look scared. He didn't even look guilty, like he'd been caught doing something wrong. He just gave me this sleepy little smile, like he knew me, like this was normal. My boyfriend stirred beside me, groggy and confused, and that movement must have snapped me fully awake because suddenly everything felt crystal clear. This wasn't a dream. There was a strange child on our bed. A second later, I heard footsteps on the stairs, fast, heavy, like someone rushing down, and the owner came into the room. She wasn't breathless, but she moved quickly like she'd done this before. "Oh, sorry about that," she said, almost laughing. "Yeah, he does that sometimes." I just stared at her. I didn't even know how to respond. My boyfriend was awake by then too, sitting up beside me with the same shocked expression I had. She took her son by the hand and pulled him out of the room, telling us again how sometimes he wandered downstairs because he was curious, or because he thought the apartment was empty. She said it like it was no big deal, like this was an everyday occurrence, but here's the thing, our door had been locked. I remembered turning the lock before going to bed. I even double-checked because the basement entrance felt slightly separate from the main house and I wanted to feel secure. There was no way this little boy should have been able to get inside. When she left, my boyfriend and I just sat there for a while, wide awake. Neither of us knew what to say. It was uncomfortable in a way that's hard to describe, like, if it had just been a kid wandering into the wrong room in his own house, I might have brushed it off. But this was different. First of all, she was renting the apartment to us. It was supposed to be private. Second, her explanation didn't make sense. How was her son able to come into a locked apartment? And third, and this was the part that stuck with me the most, why was he trying to crawl into bed with us? It wasn't just that he came inside. He didn't look around the room, didn't ask us who we were. He climbed onto the bed like it was the most normal thing in the world. Like maybe he'd done it before. That thought sat with me for the rest of the stay. We tried to brush it off, telling ourselves it was just a weird, isolated thing. But the rest of the trip I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. Every time I heard a sound in the hallway outside or the creak of the stairs, I wondered if one of the kids was going to come wandering in again. During the day, everything looked normal enough. We'd go out sightseeing, and when we came back, the basement looked exactly how we left it. Our bags still in the same spot, our things undisturbed. But at night, the atmosphere changed. The silence of the house above us wasn't comforting. It was heavy. Every creak, every faint noise made my stomach tighten. The worst part was realizing that the lock didn't really matter. If the owner or her kids wanted to come into the apartment, they could. We had no real privacy. The basement door had two locks, one we could control and one clearly on her side. It made me wonder how often she actually came down there when guests were out. How often her son had wandered in before. On the last night, I barely slept. I just lay awake, listening to every creak and shift in the house above us, jumping at every little sound. My boyfriend tried to tell me it was fine, that it was just a kid being a kid, but I could tell he was uncomfortable too. He double-checked the lock before bed, even pushed a chair against the door. Nothing happened that night. Nobody came in. But I was still on edge the whole time, watching the faint line of light under the door, waiting for a shadow to pass by. When we finally checked out, the owner was cheerful, acting like everything was normal. She thanked us for staying, told us we were welcome back any time. We smiled politely, but inside both of us knew we'd never stay there again. Looking back, I think what unsettled me the most wasn't the boy himself. It was the way the mom dismissed it. Like it was completely normal for her child to wander into a locked apartment and try to crawl into bed with strangers. The casualness of it, the lack of boundaries. It left me with this really disturbing feeling, like the whole setup was wrong, like there were no clear lines between her private family space and the apartment she was renting out. And when you're traveling, you're vulnerable. You trust that when you book a place, you'll be safe, that you'll have privacy. That night showed me how easily that trust can be broken. Even now, whenever I think about it, I can still see that boy climbing onto the blanket in the early morning light, his little face smiling like he belonged there, and I can still hear his mother's voice, casual and unconcerned. Oh yeah, he does that sometimes. It was one of the creepiest, most unsettling travel experiences I've ever had. A few years ago, I stayed at an Airbnb the night before my best friend's wedding. It was supposed to be a generous gift. One of her family friends owned the place and offered it to us free of charge for the night. The plan was simple. All the bridesmaids would sleep there together, get up early, and start prepping for the wedding the next day. It was meant to be fun and easy, almost like a sleepover before a big event. When we arrived, the house seemed nice enough. It wasn't a small apartment or a basement rental. It was an older two-story house with creaky wooden floors and a sort of lived-in feel. Not dirty or run-down, but not polished either. The kind of place where you can tell a family actually lives, even if they're not there at the moment. There were family photos on the walls, random books stacked on the shelves, a couple of coats still hanging by the front door, and that faint smell of other people's laundry detergent mixed with a scent I couldn't quite place, like old wood and fabric softener. At first, none of that really bothered me. We were too busy laughing and unpacking dresses, makeup, and wedding stuff. There was a nervous excitement in the air because of the wedding the next morning. Everyone was chatting, eating snacks, trying on outfits for the rehearsal dinner, and FaceTiming friends and family. It felt more like a dorm common room than a rented house. I do remember a moment, though, while I was walking down the hall carrying my bag. There was a row of framed photos on the wall. Birthdays, Christmas mornings, the same kids growing up over the years. They were smiling, but the smiles felt strangely intimate for a stranger's house. It's one thing seeing family pictures in someone's living room when you're invited. It's another to be sleeping there when you've never even met the people in them. By the time we finally wound down for the night, it was late. The bride went to bed in one of the rooms upstairs. Two of the bridesmaids claimed another room, and I stayed in a smaller guest room by myself. The house was quiet except for the occasional groan of the old wood settling. I remember lying down and thinking how weird it felt to be in someone else's house like that. It wasn't like a hotel where everything's neutral and designed for strangers. This was someone's actual home, someone we didn't even know, and we were just kind of living in their space for the night. The guest room was simple but cozy. There was a small wooden nightstand with a lamp that flickered a little when I turned it on. The window had thin floral curtains that barely blocked out the porch light outside. The bedspread was an old quilt that smelled faintly like lavender detergent and something else, maybe cedar. It was the kind of smell that's not unpleasant but still feels unfamiliar. I fell asleep eventually. Somewhere in the middle of the night, though, everything changed. I had the worst nightmare of my life. I can still remember it vividly even now. In the dream, all of us and the bride and all the bridesmaids were trapped inside that Airbnb. The doors were locked, the windows wouldn't open, and outside the house there was this strange man. I never saw his face clearly, but I knew he was dangerous. He was trying to get in, trying to hurt us. In the dream, he was walking around the house, knocking on the walls from the outside, and then suddenly the house was on fire. Flames were everywhere, crawling up the walls, black smoke filling the rooms. We were screaming, running from room to room, but there was nowhere to go. The man was still outside, and the fire was inside, and it felt like the house itself wanted to trap us. It wasn't like a movie nightmare where everything's exaggerated and over the top. It felt real. The kind of terror that's subtle and slow, where every instinct in your body is telling you you're not safe. When I woke up, my heart was racing so hard it felt like it might break through my ribs. I was drenched in sweat, my shirt sticking to my back. For a second, I couldn't tell if I was still dreaming. The room felt wrong. The air felt heavy, like there was some kind of pressure pushing down on me. Every shadow in the corners seemed darker than it should have been. Even the pattern on the floral curtains looked distorted in the dim light, like faces where there shouldn't have been any. I told myself it was just a nightmare, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The house was completely silent, but it wasn't a peaceful silence. It felt watchful. I turned on the little lamp by the bed and just sat there trying to calm down. The lamplight made the room look different. Not better, just different. The colors seemed muted, like the life had been drained out of everything. I even got up and walked around the room. I checked the window, checked the door. Everything was locked, just as it had been when I went to bed. But I couldn't get myself to lie back down. The feeling of negative energy in the house was so strong it was almost physical. I'm not someone who usually believes in stuff like that. I'm pretty skeptical about ghosts, bad vibes, all of it. But that night I couldn't deny how oppressive it felt. I stayed awake for the rest of the night, sitting up in bed with the lamp on, scrolling through my phone to distract myself. Every time the old house creaked, I jumped. Every time a car passed by outside, I felt my heart skip. I just wanted the sun to come up so I could get out of there. Once or twice I thought I heard faint footsteps in the hallway, but I told myself it was just the house settling, or one of the girls getting up to use the bathroom. Still, I didn't open the door. I just sat there with my phone in my hand, the light from the screen casting a pale glow on my face. When morning finally came, I felt exhausted but relieved. The house looked normal in the daylight, which almost made me doubt myself. Like maybe I'd just freaked out over nothing. The smell of coffee and makeup remover filled the kitchen. The bride was laughing about something with one of the other bridesmaids. Everything seemed fine. But then one of the other bridesmaids came into the kitchen while I was making coffee. She looked as tired as I felt. She hesitated for a second, then said, "This is going to sound crazy, but I had the worst nightmare last night. I dreamed that we were all murdered in this house." I froze. She went on to describe her dream. It wasn't exactly the same as mine. In hers, the man actually got inside. But the theme was eerily similar. We were all trapped. We were all in danger. She even said she'd felt like there was some kind of scary energy in the house afterward and hadn't been able to sleep. Hearing her say that out loud made my stomach drop. It was one thing for me to have a bad dream and feel unsettled. It was another for someone else in another room to have almost the same experience. I told her about mine, and we both just stared at each other for a second, goosebumps on our arms. We didn't tell the bride right away because we didn't want to stress her out, but eventually we mentioned it. She brushed it off. She said it was probably just nerves, that everyone was stressed about the wedding and sleeping in a strange place. Maybe she was right. That's what I tried to tell myself too. But deep down it didn't feel like a coincidence. As we got ready that morning, curling hair, doing makeup, pinning dresses, everything looked normal. But I kept glancing around the house. The framed photos, the creaky stairs, the way certain corners felt colder than others. It was like the daylight had washed everything clean, but I couldn't forget the heaviness of the night. I've stayed in plenty of hotels and rentals since then, and nothing like that has ever happened again. In fact, that night was the last time I stayed at an Airbnb. I haven't been able to bring myself to book one since. Even scrolling through listings online makes me feel uneasy. I still don't know how to explain it. Maybe it really was just nerves. Maybe the house was old and had weird vibes. Maybe the fact that it belonged to someone we didn't know got under my skin. But when I think back on it, what I remember isn't the dream itself, but the way I felt when I woke up. The certainty that something was wrong, that something about that house didn't want us there, and then the next morning, hearing someone else describe almost the same nightmare. It's stuck with me ever since. I'm a skeptical person. I don't believe in haunted houses, but that night in that Airbnb I felt something I can't explain, and it was enough to change the way I travel forever. Just north of the San Francisco Bay Area, I rented a room in a large, extremely secluded house. It was one of those Airbnbs that looked almost too good to be true in the pictures. Spacious, quiet, surrounded by nothing but nature. The photos showed big open windows, lots of light, and acres of forest stretching out in every direction. It seemed peaceful, the kind of place where I could take a breath and recharge. I thought it would be the perfect stopover for me and my puppy while we were traveling through California. The drive there was anything but relaxing. By the time I reached that part of the state, the weather had turned. It wasn't just raining. It was one of those full-on storms that make you grip the steering wheel tighter and lean forward, as if being a few inches closer to the windshield will help you see better. The rain hit so hard it felt like I was driving through a waterfall, and even with my wipers on the highest setting, I could barely make out the winding road ahead. Every now and then, a flash of lightning lit up the trees, showing just how isolated I was. By the time I pulled up to the property, I already had that sinking, uneasy feeling. The driveway stretched on for what felt like forever, twisting and curving deeper into the woods before finally opening up to reveal the house. It was massive, standing completely alone at the end of the road. No neighbors, no streetlights, just a dark outline against the stormy sky. I parked, hurried out of the car with my small puppy tucked against my chest, and ran for the front door. My shoes slipped on the wet pavement, and by the time I stepped inside, I was soaked and out of breath. I remember thinking, okay, you made it. Just dry off, get settled, and ride out the storm. But the moment I crossed the threshold, something felt off. The house was huge. 5 bedrooms, multiple hallways, ceilings that seemed higher than they needed to be. But when I tried to get into the room I had booked, the handle wouldn't turn. It was locked. At first I thought maybe I had the wrong door. I pulled up my booking confirmation on my phone and double-checked. No, I had the right one. I tried the other doors just out of curiosity. 4 of them opened easily. Only mine was sealed shut. That set the tone right away. My gut told me this wasn't normal, but what could I do? There was no internet in the house, no TV, not even a faint cell signal. I felt cut off the second I stepped inside. The only sound came from the refrigerator in the kitchen, an obnoxious hum that somehow made the silence in the rest of the house even heavier. When I opened the fridge to put away the small bag of groceries I'd brought, I recoiled instantly. The smell was horrible, sour and spoiled. Inside were old containers that looked like they hadn't been touched in weeks. One carton of milk was so swollen it looked like it might burst. I slammed the door shut and decided right then I'd avoid the kitchen completely. The layout of the house was strange too. One entire wall from end to end was nothing but glass. Floor-to-ceiling windows and sliding glass doors lined up in a row. I'm sure it looked beautiful on a sunny morning with light pouring in and a view of the trees. But in the middle of a storm it felt wrong. Like I was exposed, sitting in a fishbowl, with the outside world able to see me while I could barely make out anything beyond the sheets of rain. When I finally got into the room that was assigned to me, one of the other unlocked ones, I realized how oddly designed it was. One wall had a door leading back into the interior of the house. Directly opposite, there were 2 glass doors opening out into what looked like a metal dog run. It wasn't just a small cage or pen. It wrapped around 3 sides of the house, almost like an exterior prison built specifically for animals. The bars stretched high and the floor was wet from the rain, giving it a bleak industrial look that felt wildly out of place against the polished inside of the house. At first, I didn't dwell on it. I was exhausted from the drive and carrying my puppy everywhere so she wouldn't slip on the wet floor. I told myself the dog run was probably for the owner's pets. Nothing strange about that. But then I saw him, a German shepherd. It was pacing in the dog run, directly outside the glass doors of my room. Its size struck me immediately. It was massive compared to my little puppy towering over her. At first it didn't bark. It just walked back and forth, slow and deliberate, eyes locked on us. Its nails clicked against the wet metal with every step. Then, the moment it caught sight of my puppy in my arms, its entire demeanor changed. The shepherd lunged forward, barking with such force that the sound rattled the glass. It ran back and forth frantically, slamming its body against the fencing as if it were desperate to get inside. Its teeth flashed, foam gathering at its mouth. My chest vibrated from the volume of the barking. My puppy whimpered, curling tighter against me. I tried to reassure myself. The glass doors are sturdy. They're locked. We're safe in here. But the shepherd didn't slow down. It kept throwing itself at the barrier with terrifying force, and then it broke through. The shattering glass was deafening like an explosion inside the room. Before I could process what had happened, the German shepherd was already inside, launching itself at us. Its jaws clamped around my puppy's neck in an instant. That moment replays in my head constantly. The way time seemed to slow down, the sound of my puppy's terrified yelp, the sheer strength of the shepherd as it shook her violently like a rag doll. I screamed, pure panic taking over. Without thinking, I threw myself at the dog. I grabbed handfuls of its collar, its fur, anything I could get my hands on, trying desperately to pull it off my puppy. The growl that rumbled from its chest was deep and guttural, unlike anything I'd ever heard up close. My arms strained as I tried to pry its jaws open. Somehow, through sheer adrenaline, I managed to make it release her. I scooped my puppy into my arms, who was trembling and crying, and tossed her onto the bed behind me. Then I shoved the shepherd toward the interior door of the room and slammed it shut the second it crossed the threshold. My hands shook so badly I could barely turn the lock. The relief lasted only seconds. The shepherd went wild on the other side of the door, barking nonstop, slamming its full weight against the wood. Each impact made the frame shudder. I pressed my back against it, praying it wouldn't burst through a second time. I checked my puppy as quickly as I could, turning her over in my hands, searching for puncture wounds. She was trembling but alive, her tiny body shivering from shock. My heart was pounding so hard it hurt. That's when the realization hit me. The shepherd was loose in the rest of the house now. It had free run of everything. And I was trapped in the bedroom with no way out, no internet, no TV, no neighbors nearby, just me, my injured puppy, and a furious dog trying to break its way back in. I knew I couldn't wait it out. I pulled out my phone with shaking fingers, relieved to see I had just enough of a signal to dial 911. My voice shook as I tried to explain. There's a German shepherd that broke into my Airbnb. It attacked my dog. I'm locked in the bedroom. Please send help. The dispatcher didn't laugh or brush me off, which I half expected. She took me seriously, asking me to stay calm and stay on the line. She warned me it would take time for officers to reach me because of how remote the property was. She asked if I had the owner's contact information. I didn't. Airbnb handled all of that. Eventually, they managed to track the owner down. He was in Italy at the time. The back and forth between him and the police was messy. Broken English, long pauses, confusion. But they learned enough to confirm that the shepherd was his dog. The wait for the police felt endless. I sat on the floor, my back against the shaking door, clutching my puppy in my lap while the storm raged outside. Every time thunder rolled, the shepherd barked louder, throwing its weight against the doorframe as if it could sense my fear. When the officers finally arrived, I heard the thud of footsteps and muffled voices through the house. The shepherd's barking grew even more frenzied. They had to bring in animal control to handle it. From inside the room I could hear the struggle, the snarling, the sound of furniture crashing, men shouting commands. It took a long time, but eventually they managed to restrain the dog. When they called my name and told me it was safe to come out, I opened the door slowly. The sight of the house stopped me in my tracks. Broken glass glittered across the floor. Muddy paw prints smeared every surface. Rain blew in through the shattered doors, pooling on the hardwood. The once pristine Airbnb looked like a scene of chaos. The officers escorted me outside so I could grab my belongings. I carried my puppy tight against my chest the entire time, her little body still trembling but warm. The storm was still raging, and as I stepped back into the night air, I felt a mix of exhaustion and raw relief. I didn't look back at the house. I just got into my car and drove. A few miles down the road, I pulled over, turned off the engine, and finally broke down. The adrenaline drained out of me all at once. I cried harder than I had in years, my body shaking almost as much as my puppy curled up in my lap. We ended up sleeping in the car until morning, both too drained to go any further. Airbnb later gave me a full refund, but honestly, that meant nothing. The money wasn't the issue. The entire experience left me shaken in a way I can't even explain. I'd gone there expecting peace and quiet in the countryside, and instead I ended up fighting off a dog attack, locking myself in a room and calling 911 just to make it out alive. It was, without a doubt, one of the scariest nights of my life, and every time I think back on it I can still hear the deep snarling bark of that shepherd, and feel the doorframe trembling under its weight as it tried, over and over, to get back inside. A while back, my friend and I booked what looked like the cutest little cabin in the woods. At least that's what the pictures showed. The listing made it look quiet, cozy, rustic, but charming. The perfect escape. Both of us had been stressed with work, family, and just the pace of life, so the idea of a weekend away from everything sounded ideal. Just 2 women, a couple of bottles of wine, a deck of cards, and no distractions. We planned it like a mini vacation, even though it was just a couple of days. I remember being excited the morning we left, already imagining us sitting by a fire, laughing and relaxing with nothing but trees around. The drive, though, ended up taking way longer than expected. The roads narrowed the deeper we got into the woods, winding and climbing until our GPS finally said we were only a few minutes away. By then the sun was low, dipping behind the treetops, and the shadows had that long, eerie stretch that makes everything look a little different. The first thing we saw when we pulled into the driveway was a baby swing in the yard. It was one of those old plastic bucket seats, faded and cracked, hanging from a frayed rope tied to a crooked branch. But it wasn't the swing itself that unsettled us. It was what was strapped into it, a dirty, worn-out teddy bear. The bear looked like it had been out there for years, its fur stiff with dirt, one eye missing, its stitched smile faded to almost nothing. The wind, or maybe just the momentum of our car pulling in, made it sway gently back and forth. We both sat there in silence for a second before nervously laughing, trying to brush it off. "Creepy decor," my friend joked, but the laugh didn't stick. There was something about that bear and that swing in that yard that instantly put us on edge. We got out of the car, but before we could even grab our bags, we noticed something even worse. Taped right onto the front door was a huge sheet of paper, with our names written across it. Not welcome guests, not something generic. It had both of our first and last names written in big, bold letters. I can't explain how unsettling that felt in that moment. For two women traveling alone in the middle of nowhere, it wasn't welcoming. It felt targeted, like someone had gone out of their way to announce that they knew exactly who we were. We hesitated, bags still in the car, just standing there and staring at the cabin. From the photos online, it had looked quaint and well kept. In person, it looked sad, sagging like it hadn't been cared for in years. The paint was peeling, the front steps were soft and bowed, and the porch leaned in a way that made me wonder if it would collapse under too much weight. But we'd already driven hours. There was no cell service, no bars, no quick option to turn around and find somewhere else. We told ourselves we were just being paranoid, that it would be fine. So we opened the front door. The sound it made was straight out of a horror movie, a long, slow creak that echoed into the empty house. And what we found inside immediately killed any hope that this was going to be a cozy getaway. The place was a disaster. The photos on the listing had clearly been staged or taken years ago, because what we walked into looked nothing like them. The furniture was mismatched, stained, and sagging. The air had a sharp chemical smell, not the lemony, fresh smell of cleaning products, but something more bitter, metallic almost. It instantly made me think of basements or garages, the kind of smell that clings to your throat, and the floors. The floors were covered in sticky mousetraps, not just one or two tucked into corners, but scattered everywhere. We literally had to watch every step we took to avoid getting stuck. Some of the traps weren't even new. They had tufts of fur, tiny droppings stuck to them, evidence that something had already been caught. We froze, both of us whispering, debating in hushed voices about what to do. It felt wrong to even be standing there, like we'd stumbled into a place we weren't supposed to see. But at the same time, the sun was gone. The woods outside were getting darker by the second, and we didn't know the area at all. Leaving felt dangerous, but so did staying. I tried to check out the sliding glass door in the back, the one that was supposed to lead onto a deck. When I tugged at the handle, the whole door came right off its track in my hands. I just stood there holding it, realizing that if I could pull it out that easily, so could anyone else. The place wasn't just creepy, and it was completely unsafe. That was it for me. I wasn't staying there, not even one night. But we still had the problem of no cell service. We needed Wi-Fi to find the nearest hotel. The listing had promised it, so I searched the kitchen until I spotted a crumpled piece of paper taped to the wall with a Wi-Fi network and password scrawled on it. I was standing at the counter, typing it into my phone when the front door slammed. Hard. Both of us froze instantly. We looked at each other, waiting for the other to say something, but neither of us spoke. It wasn't just the wind. It sounded deliberate. At the same time, the motion light outside clicked on, flooding the porch with harsh white light. Shadows stretched across the warped boards, making everything look distorted. Then came another sound, and from above us, quick darting footsteps in the ceiling. Something or several somethings scurrying back and forth across the attic. That was all we needed to hear. I grabbed my bag, my friend snatched hers, and we bolted. I don't even remember shutting the door behind us. We sprinted past the swing, where the teddy bear still rocked slowly in the glow of the motion light. In that moment, with its empty face turned toward us, it looked more sinister than ever. We threw our stuff into the car, locked the doors, and took off down the dark dirt road. Neither of us looked back. We didn't even breathe properly until we found the main road. It took a while, but eventually we spotted a Holiday Inn. The sight of that bland, corporate hotel lit up against the night felt like heaven. Clean lobby, polite staff, no surprises. We checked in, and when I collapsed onto the bed in that plain room with stiff white sheets and a working lock, I felt more relieved than I can describe. Looking back now, we laugh about it. We even gave the place a nickname, the Meth Lab Cabin, because honestly, that's what it felt like. The chemical smell, the critters in the attic, the overall state of disrepair. It didn't seem like a place anyone actually lived in, or one meant for hospitality. It felt like a front for something else entirely. But in the moment, there was nothing funny about it. The names on the door, the traps littering the floor, the broken glass door, and that constant sense that something was watching. It built this heavy dread that didn't go away until we were safely miles away. Even now, years later, I can picture that teddy bear swaying in the swing under the porch light. That image has stuck with me in a way I can't shake. I still get chills every time I think about it. I've stayed at a lot of Airbnbs over the past few years. Business trips, quick weekend getaways, you name it. But nothing, and I mean nothing, compares to what happened on this one. My partner and I had been craving a quiet escape, something a little off the grid but still comfortable enough to enjoy. We found this place on an island, absolutely stunning in the photos. Bright, airy rooms, ocean views, palm trees swaying just outside the windows. It looked like a dream, and the price? Honestly, shockingly affordable. That should have been my first clue that something was off, but I brushed it aside. Everyone loves a bargain, right? I did notice the reviews were mixed. A lot of people praised the beauty of the house, but several warned about the owner. Charges extra for anything out of place, one person wrote. Another mentioned a strict, almost obsessive list of rules. A few even claimed they were billed hundreds of dollars after checkout for things like moving a chair or leaving a blanket folded differently. It sounded extreme, but I convinced myself these must have been difficult guests or overblown complaints. Besides, we're clean and respectful. No way this would be a problem for us. 2 nights before our flight, I got a message from the host asking if he could call me. That immediately set off my internal alarm. In all my stays, I'd never had a host want to actually call me, especially before arrival. Normally, it's just a friendly message, check-in instructions, that kind of thing. But he was insistent, said he liked to personally get to know his guests and make sure everything goes smoothly. I'm not great on the phone. I'm one of those awkward people who rehearse what they're going to say before dialing, and even then it comes out weird. But my partner shrugged and said, just do it. Maybe he's old-fashioned. So I reluctantly agreed. The call was odd. He had this overly familiar tone, asking a ton of personal questions that didn't feel necessary for a host to know. What I did for work, why we were going on vacation, how long we'd been together, where we were flying from. He even asked about my partner's contact information and said he'd need it for the file. The whole thing left me uncomfortable, but I kept telling myself I was overreacting. Maybe this was just his way of screening people, making sure we weren't going to trash the place. An hour after we hung up, my phone buzzed again, an email from him. Attached was a 27-page PDF of house rules. 27 pages. I scrolled through it thinking it was a joke, but Nope. There were rules for everything. How to open the blinds, gently only from the left side. How to use the coasters, always under any glassware, even disposable cups. Even a diagram of how the couch cushions should look when we left. He asked me to confirm I'd read it. Not just me, my partner too. We both had to email him back separately, acknowledging we'd gone through the entire thing. At this point, I was freaked out, but too deep in to back out. The trip was already booked, the ferry tickets purchased. I kept telling myself, it's just a few days. Follow the rules and you'll be fine. The day finally came. The ferry ride was long but gorgeous. Turquoise water stretching as far as you could see. When we arrived, the island was even more beautiful than the pictures. I almost felt silly for worrying. Maybe this was just one of those quirky experiences you laugh about later. When we got to the house, my jaw actually dropped. It was gorgeous, exactly like the photos. A little dated in terms of decor, lots of heavy curtains, dark wood furniture, knickknacks everywhere, but charming in its own way. It smelled faintly like lavender cleaner, and everything was pristine like a staged home in a catalog. Then I started noticing the labels. Everything, literally everything, was labeled. The salt and pepper shakers, the remote control. Each drawer in the kitchen had a label maker strip telling you what was inside. Even the broom had a tag. Return to closet after use. At first I tried to laugh it off. At least we'll know where everything is, I joked to my partner. But inside it unsettled me. It felt like we'd stepped into someone's private, obsessively curated world, and any wrong move might be punished. That first evening was uneventful but tense. We were hyper-aware of everything we touched. I kept glancing up at the corners of the rooms, half expecting to see cameras, but I didn't spot anything obvious. The thermostat was one of those modern Wi-Fi-enabled ones, which felt weirdly out of place in a house otherwise stuck in the 90s. I told myself I was being paranoid. Still, the feeling wouldn't go away. It was like there was a presence in the house, silent but heavy. Not supernatural, not like a ghost, but like a person standing just behind you, watching. The next morning, the power flickered. Just for a minute. The lights went out, the Wi-Fi cut off, then everything came back. We didn't think much of it, this was a small island after all. But within minutes, my phone buzzed. It was the host. Hey, the Wi-Fi dropped. Can you reconnect it? The message read. I stared at the screen. How did he know so fast? A second later, another message. My housekeeper's power went out too. She mentioned it, and I noticed I was disconnected from the thermostat. Please confirm it's back online. I felt my stomach drop. This man was thousands of miles away, supposedly in the US, and yet he knew instantly when the Wi-Fi went down. He was monitoring the house in real time. I texted back quickly. All good now. Everything's back on, but my hands were shaking. I looked at my partner. He's watching us, I whispered. They tried to brush it off. It's probably just the thermostat app. Those things send alerts. Maybe. But between the phone call, the PDF, the labels, and now this, it felt like we weren't just guests. We were being observed. The rest of the stay was a blur of unease. We tried to relax, but it was impossible to shake the feeling of invisible eyes. We started joking about it, give him a good show. My partner would laugh when we were changing clothes, but the humor didn't help much. At night, every creak in the house made me jump. I found myself lowering my voice even when we were alone, as if someone might be listening. We left the house exactly as we found it. No chair out of place, no blanket folded wrong. We double-checked every drawer, every cushion. When we finally locked the door behind us, I felt a rush of relief, like we were escaping something. A week later, I got the email notification, our Airbnb review. 5 stars. Wonderful guests, left the place spotless. Would host again anytime. I read it out loud to my partner and we both just stared at each other. We'll never know exactly what was going on in that house. Maybe it was just an overly controlling host. Maybe there were cameras hidden somewhere. Maybe he was just using smart devices to keep tabs. Whatever it was, I've never felt that kind of creeping, silent surveillance in my life, And I'll tell you this. I don't care how pretty or affordable a listing is. If the host wants to call me ahead of time or sends me a rule book the size of a novel, I'm out. Because I'm pretty sure we weren't just staying in an Airbnb. We were part of someone's experiment. I don't usually post online about my personal experiences, but what happened to me and my kids a few years ago still makes my skin crawl whenever I think about it. It's the reason I completely stopped using Airbnb. Back then, I was a single mom trying to juggle work and parenting, and I really needed a break. My 2 kids were still pretty young. My oldest was 5 and my daughter had just turned 3. And between daycare, work deadlines, and everything else, I was exhausted. Money was tight, so when I found a listing for a small cabin in the middle of nowhere at a very reasonable price, it felt like a sign. The pictures were beautiful. A cozy wooden cabin tucked away in the woods, surrounded by tall pine trees. A little creek ran behind it. The listing said perfect for a peaceful family getaway. That sounded exactly like what I needed. No noise, no traffic, no distractions. The reviews were mostly positive, although a few people had mentioned the location being remote or hard to get to. One person noted there was no cell service. I figured that was a good thing. A chance to unplug. We drove out there on a Friday afternoon. The further we got, the more we lost reception. By the time we reached the dirt road leading to the cabin, my phone was basically useless except for photos. It was quiet, too quiet. No houses, no cars passing by, not even power lines. Just endless woods and this little cabin at the end of a gravel driveway. When we arrived, the cabin looked exactly like the photos. Small but clean, with a wraparound porch and rocking chairs. The interior was rustic but charming. Stone fireplace, wood-paneled walls, old but sturdy furniture. There was a guest book on the counter with little notes from other families about how peaceful their stay had been. That put me at ease a bit. The first day went smoothly. The kids played outside near the creek while I unpacked. We had a simple dinner, read some books, and went to bed early. The quiet was so deep it almost felt heavy, like you could hear the silence pressing against the walls. The second night is when things got strange. I had just finished giving my daughter a bath. It was dusk that time of day when the light fades fast and everything outside starts to look like a shadow. The bathroom was small and steam from the hot water fogged up the mirror. I had wrapped my daughter in a towel and was brushing her hair when I heard the door open. At first I thought I'd left the front door unlocked and the wind had blown it open. But then footsteps, heavy, deliberate, crossed the living room floor. I froze. A man's voice called out, "Hello?" I stepped into the hallway, heart hammering. A tall man was standing there in the middle of the living room. I immediately recognized him from the Airbnb profile photo, the owner. He smiled like it was no big deal. "Just checking in," he said. "Making sure everything's okay, no knock." No text, just walked in. I was alone with my kids. My son was sitting at the kitchen table coloring, and my daughter was clinging to me, dripping wet. I remember feeling this wave of confusion and discomfort. The guy didn't seem threatening. He had on jeans, a jacket, and work boots like he'd been outside doing chores. He even took his hat off and apologized for startling me. "I was in the area and thought I'd pop in," he said. "Sometimes guests have trouble with the hot water." I tried to be polite but firm. I told him everything was fine and that next time he should please knock. He nodded, apologized again, and left after a few minutes. The whole encounter was awkward and unsettling, but I tried to brush it off. Maybe this was just normal out here. Maybe he was used to treating the place like his own home. Still, I made sure to lock the door after he left. Later that night, after the kids were asleep, I lay awake in bed replaying the whole thing. Something about the way he just walked in without warning nagged at me. I told myself I was being paranoid, but I kept my phone next to me even though it had no reception. Just holding it felt like a lifeline. Sometime after midnight, I woke up to the sound of the front door opening again. It wasn't a knock. It wasn't the creak of the house settling. It was the unmistakable sound of someone letting themselves in, the soft scrape of the door frame. Then footsteps. Every hair on my body stood on end. I sat up and strained to listen. Someone was moving through the living room, slow and steady. Not the owner's voice this time. No greeting, just movement. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would wake the kids. I slipped out of bed and crept into the small kitchenette. My hands were shaking as I opened the drawer and grabbed the first thing I saw, a kitchen knife. I whispered my son's name and told him to come to me quietly. He rubbed his eyes, confused but obedient. I scooped my daughter up from her bed, still half asleep, and ushered both kids into the master bedroom. I locked the door and pressed my back against it, clutching the knife with one hand. The footsteps stopped. Whoever it was must have realized the bedroom was occupied. Then silence. For a few seconds I thought they might try the handle, but instead I heard the door open again, then close. Just like that, they were gone. I stood there in the dark, my breath coming in short gasps, straining to hear any sign they were still outside. Nothing. Just the heavy silence of the woods. I stayed like that for what felt like hours, not daring to move. The kids eventually fell back asleep on the floor. I didn't sleep at all. I sat in the corner of the room, knife in hand, waiting for the sound of the door again. It never came. When the sun rose, the cabin looked exactly the same as before. No signs of forced entry, nothing out of place. I checked every window and door. Locked. I even walked around outside, heart hammering, scanning the tree line. No one. We packed up and left a day early. I didn't care about losing the money. I just wanted out. Later, when I calmed down enough to think rationally, I told myself it had to have been the owner's family or friends. Maybe they didn't realize someone was staying there. Maybe it was just a misunderstanding. But even if that were true, the idea that strangers could just walk in while I was alone with my kids, twice, made me feel sick. It's an anticlimactic ending, I guess. Nothing happened. We weren't attacked. We weren't robbed. But that feeling, the cold, sinking realization that someone was in the house with us, will never leave me. I don't use Airbnb anymore. When I think about the worst travel decision I ever made, my mind always goes back to that month we spent in Toronto. We thought we were treating ourselves, staying in a luxury condo high above the city. But it turned out to be one of the most stressful, unsettling experiences of my life. It started out innocently enough. My partner and I had just relocated temporarily for work, and we had our toddler with us. The idea was to find a place where we could live comfortably for a full month, somewhere with space for our kid to run around, a nice view, and good access to the city. Hotels were expensive and cramped, so Airbnb felt like the smarter option. We spent hours scrolling through listings, comparing prices, photos, and reviews. Then we found it. A sleek modern condo with huge windows overlooking downtown. White marble countertops, chic furniture, spotless bathrooms. It looked perfect. The reviews were glowing, and the price, while high, seemed fair for what was being advertised. After messaging the host and double-checking the dates, we booked it. I remember feeling relieved, like a weight was off my shoulders. A whole month settled. Somewhere safe, clean, and beautiful for us and our child. Or so I thought. The building itself looked great when we arrived. It was one of those shiny glass towers that dominate Toronto's skyline. The lobby had marble floors, security guards, a big chandelier. For a moment, I actually felt proud walking in, like we'd made the right choice. But the second we stepped into the actual unit, my stomach dropped. This was not the condo we'd seen in the photos. Not even close. Instead of the sleek white interior, we walked into a dingy, dated apartment. The furniture was mismatched and worn. The couch had stains on it. The kitchen counters were scratched and cluttered with cheap appliances. The beds looked like they'd been thrown together with bargain sheets. I pulled up the listing on my phone, scrolling through the glossy photos of floor-to-ceiling windows and designer chairs. Then looking back at the drab, slightly grimy room we were standing in, they weren't the same place. Not even in the same ballpark. Immediately we messaged the host. I expected an apology, maybe even a solution, but instead we got a phone number and were told to call a property management company. That's when things really started to feel shady. The people at the management company were off. They spoke in circles, dodging our questions, acting like we were imagining things. I literally held up the photos from the listing and described what was in them versus what we were standing in. Their response? It's the same unit. Sometimes the lighting makes things look different. Different? This wasn't a matter of angles or lighting. This was like booking a 5-star hotel and being handed the keys to a rundown motel room. But they refused to admit it. Their tone was dismissive, almost mocking, like they'd dealt with this before and didn't care. The reality was, we didn't have much of a choice. We'd just traveled across the country with a toddler. It was the middle of fall 2020. COVID was still a constant stress hanging over everything. We couldn't exactly bounce around from place to place. Hotels were expensive and many were full. We needed somewhere to stay, and as much as I hated it, this condo was what we had. So we unpacked and settled in, trying to make the best of it. At first I told myself the worst was over. The place wasn't what we'd paid for, but it was at least functional. The building seemed safe enough. We had food, shelter, and a roof over our heads, but within a few days, we realized the building itself was a nightmare. By talking to a few neighbors and overhearing conversations in the hallways, it became clear that most of the units weren't actually homes. They were Airbnbs. Almost the entire building was being rented out to strangers on a revolving basis. And a large portion of those rentals? Party pads. Every night, groups of young people would show up carrying bags of alcohol, blasting music from Bluetooth speakers as they got into the elevators. We were on the 48th floor, so we relied on the elevators constantly. By around 7 p.m., they became almost unusable. Crowds of people crammed in, unmasked, talking loudly, sometimes already drunk. This was still 2020, when everyone was hyper-conscious about COVID. My partner and I had been doing everything to keep our little one safe, avoiding crowds, masking up, disinfecting constantly. And now we were trapped in a building that was basically hosting nightly super-spreader events. It would sometimes take 10-15 minutes just to catch an elevator, because they'd stop at every floor, already full of people going to parties. We couldn't take the stairs either, not with a toddler and groceries, and definitely not from the 48th floor. So we just stopped going out at certain times. We adjusted our lives around these strangers and their parties, hiding in our unit to avoid them. The atmosphere in the building grew darker the longer we stayed. Loud music would thump through the walls late into the night. Arguments broke out in the hallways. Once, we stepped out in the morning and found vomit on the carpet outside the elevator. Another time, the fire alarm went off at 2 a.m., and when we went downstairs, the lobby was full of drunk people laughing like it was a joke. I kept thinking about how we were stuck. We couldn't leave, we couldn't complain. Who would we even complain to? The shady management company? The overwhelmed security guards in the lobby? It felt like the building was designed to protect the owner's profits, not the tenant's safety. And then, during our last week there, everything escalated. It was a Friday night, the peak time for parties. We heard the usual stream of people coming in and out, music blaring from multiple directions. I tried to tune it out, watching TV with the sound turned up, while my partner put our toddler to bed. Then sometime after midnight I heard a sound that cut through all the noise, a sharp, unmistakable pop. Then another. For a split second I told myself it was fireworks, but deep down I knew. Those were gunshots. Within minutes the building was in chaos. People screaming, running in the hallways, doors slamming. Sirens wailed outside. I grabbed my child from bed, clutching them against my chest, while my partner locked the door and peered through the peephole. We found out later that there had been a shooting during one of the parties. Someone had pulled a gun, fired into a crowd. A stray bullet had gone through the wall of another unit. barely missing the resident inside. That detail chilled me to my core. We were in a building where walls were paper thin, where bullets could literally pass from one apartment into another. I remember staring at the wall next to our bed that night, realizing how easily it could have been us. The next morning, the lobby was swarming with police. News vans were parked outside. The building management acted like nothing had happened, quietly scrubbing the incident from any official record. But I couldn't shake it, the fear, the knowledge that we'd brought our child into this environment. When our stay finally ended, I left that condo with relief I can't even describe. Relief to be out of that building, away from the parties, the shady owners, the endless unease. But also anger. Anger that we'd been deceived, trapped and put at risk in a place that was supposed to be luxury housing. I haven't booked an Airbnb since. And I never will. Because sometimes the nightmare isn't a haunted house or a creepy cabin in the woods. Sometimes it's a shiny glass tower in the middle of a city, hiding chaos and danger behind polished photos.